Because the Archdiocese is so vast, I've been everywhere. I've been down to this area, Sacred Heart, all Tinley Park. I've been up in Schaumburg, in Inverness, Wilmette, Lake Forest, Waukegan, the inner city. I've been everywhere preaching in 120-some parishes. And I know in many geographical areas, there are people who are not sympathetic to immigrants. But our church leaders, from the Pope on down, have spoken strongly and prophetically about refugees and immigrants. And we should do no less. We priests and the ACP have to raise our voices in the face of injustice and the lack of compassion and reflect in the national debate on immigration the position of Jesus Christ.
Yeah!
My fifth radical step was to respond to victims of domestic violence. As a priest, I had never seen domestic violence, except in a few extreme cases. It wasn't until I hired a pastoral minister on our parish staff, and one day she said to me, "You know, Father, almost all my clients are victims of domestic violence." And I had no idea. And I knew many of those women, but I didn't see the problem. She opened my eyes, and I thank her for that. And the more I spoke about and preached about domestic violence, the more people came to me and to our parish staff. We had to respond to the onslaught. Together, we built the largest parish-based program on domestic violence in the United States. 7 full-time counselors with a budget of almost $500,000, which we had to raise outside the parish. Remember, this is Pilsen. I learned so much from these victims. Their faith, their struggle, their sacrifice, their determination, and especially their love for their children. My sixth radical step occurred when I finished my pastorate at St. Pius in 2007. I decided that I had to take this work for domestic violence on the road. It was my passion. I developed a model of preaching on domestic violence at all weekend masses, after which I formed a local parish domestic violence group with volunteers. I've now preached in over 120 parishes and formed maybe 20 different groups, and we formed an organization. In 2011, Cardinal George said to Frank Hennigan, who was the head then at Family Ministries, he said, "We have to have somebody working on domestic violence in the Archdiocese." And Frank said, "Well, who do you want to get?" He said, "Well, ask Chuck Dahm." So Frank came to me and he said, "The Cardinal wants you to work on domestic violence." And I said, "Well, what's the salary?" He said, "There is none." I said, "Well, what's the job description?" Oh, he said, "There is none. You just keep doing what you want to do. You make it up." So I asked him, "What's the title?" He said, "Well, you make that up too." And so I began my service as the Director of Domestic Violence Outreach for the Archdiocese of Chicago in 2011. As I've asked priests to preach in their parishes, I call them, I'm surprised and discouraged by how many resist my request. Either they think it doesn't exist in their parishes, or they think it's too controversial a topic to touch. And to that I say, lay people are delighted to hear about domestic violence from the pulpit. Many of you know Father Tom Hurley. He's the pastor of Old St. Pat's. I preached in all 8 masses on a Sunday at Old St. Pat's. And before the last mass, he said to me, "Do you always get applause for your sermons?" And I said, "No, only when I preach about domestic violence." And that's true. More than half the time I preach, I get applause, because people are so happy to hear about this. We need to be aware that there are priests in our Archdiocese of Chicago who are still telling victims of domestic violence that they have to stay in their relationship because of their marriage vows. That is not the position of the Catholic Church, which clearly states no one is expected to stay in an abusive marriage. For these priests, the sacrament is more important than the suffering of the victim, the safety of the victim. In fact, it is highly questionable that the relationship they're living in is even a sacrament. So why ask them to stay in it? Almost everyone knows someone who is a victim of domestic violence. Perhaps many of you have experience with someone, or maybe you grew up in a family where there was abuse. The Center for Disease Control says that 1 out of every 4 women is either hit or sexually assaulted by her partner at some point in her life. Imagine that. This is Center for Disease Control. 1 out of every 4. And that means when we get up and preach on Sundays and we say, well, we have maybe 400 women in a number of masses, 100 of them have some experience of domestic violence. And just the physical, not speaking about the emotional, sexual, or economic part. That's huge. It's a huge problem. And we have to shed the light of Christ on this problem. So I would ask the priests here tonight, how many of you have heard me preach about domestic violence? I know I've been to some of your parishes. Okay, not too many. So I would ask all of you who are here tonight, apart from hearing me perhaps speak about domestic violence, how many of you have ever heard a sermon from somebody else about domestic violence? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Not many. So our church is very silent on this issue. We have to break that silence and be the voice of the voiceless. So I say to you tonight, if I've not preached in your parish, I'm ready to go. See me after this meeting, and we will make it happen, because we want to reach everyone who is suffering in silence, behind closed doors, abuse in their own homes. We want to get to them with the love and compassion of Jesus Christ. That's what we want to do. And we can do that if we stand up and denounce the violence and open ourselves to receive these victims. So my challenge to the ACP and all of us here tonight is to examine our work on stopping violence and helping victims, and then increasing our commitment. I know we have a commitment, but we have to increase it and enhance it, to be the peacemakers that Jesus blessed. Together, let us be the compassionate heart and hands of Jesus, reaching out to those who are suffering abuse in their own homes. Finally, I thank you all tonight for this opportunity and for the recognition of the ACP. As I said initially, it means a lot to me, and I appreciate it. May God inspire us all to do the work of Jesus Christ and to radically raise up the prophetic the voice of Jesus to all, so that the ACP can be seen as a beacon in our diocese for the defense of the defenseless and for those who are voiceless. Thank you.